What did you feel after that? What was there? Were there the normal emotions 3 days later? Where were you, Ted?
I can't really talk about that right now. That's
too painful.
I would like to. I'd like to be able to convey to you what that experience is like, but I can't. I won't be able to talk about that.
Okay.
He was charming, handsome, and intelligent. On the surface, Ted Bundy seemed like the perfect man. A law student with a bright future, friendly to everyone who met him. But behind that smile lay a darkness, a monster who would eventually confess to the brutal murders of over 30 young women. Today, we're diving into the chilling story of one of the most infamous serial killers in American history, Ted Bundy. To understand how Ted Bundy became a serial killer, we need to go back to his beginnings. Born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont, Bundy was raised in a strict and troubled household. His mother, Louise, was unwed at the time of his birth, and for years, Ted believed his grandparents were his parents, and that his mother was his older sister. This lie about his identity deeply affected him. Bundy grew up in Tacoma, Washington. He was shy and reserved in school, but excelled academically. Many saw him as a quiet, intelligent young man, but beneath the surface, Bundy was developing dark impulses. By his teenage years, he had already begun engaging in voyeurism, peeping into windows late at night. This pattern of secretly observing women without their knowledge would later evolve into something far more dangerous. While it's unclear exactly when Bundy began committing violent crimes, many believe his disturbing tendencies were taking shape long before anyone noticed. Fast forward to 1974. Ted Bundy is now in his late 20s and studying law at the University of Utah. Outwardly, he seemed like a success, a young man with political ambitions, someone who could easily win people over with his charm and good looks. But young women were starting to disappear across several states. At first, the disappearances seemed random. Each woman was young, attractive, and often last seen in or around college campuses. But police soon realized they were dealing with a dangerous predator. Bundy's method was as cruel as it was clever. He would fake an injury, pretending his arm or leg was in a cast, and approach women, asking for help. His good looks and polite demeanor made it hard for them to refuse. Once they were close enough, he would strike, knocking them unconscious and abducting them in his car. Bundy's car, a 1968 Volkswagen Beetle, became his deadly tool. The passenger seat was often removed to make space for his victims. After luring them into the car, Bundy would incapacitate them, sometimes handcuffing them, before driving them to a remote location. In the darkness, Bundy's true cruelty would unfold. He sexually assaulted and murdered his victims, often returning to the crime scenes later to revisit the bodies. The details of what Bundy did to these women are horrific, and his depravity knew no limits. By the summer of 1974, the pattern was clear. Bundy's killing spree was spreading. He moved from Washington to Oregon, and then to Utah. The police, however, had very few leads. Ted Bundy was exceptionally careful. He left almost no evidence, no clear connections between his victims, and his charming personality made it hard for anyone to suspect him. There was one clue. Several survivors described a man named Ted who drove a Volkswagen Beetle. But at the time, no one could imagine that the well-liked law student could be responsible for such horrific crimes. Bundy seemed untouchable. By day, Bundy lived a normal life. He had a girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, who would later play a surprising role in his life, and he continued his studies. But at night, he was hunting. His ability to lead a double life made him one of the most dangerous killers of his time. In August 1975, Bundy's luck took a turn. While driving through a Utah neighborhood late at night, Bundy was pulled over by police for erratic driving. Inside the car, the officer found a ski mask, handcuffs, a crowbar, and other suspicious items. It was enough to arrest him on suspicion of attempted kidnapping. Bundy was finally in custody, but even then, the full scope of his crimes wasn't clear. He was only charged with kidnapping, but as the investigation deepened, police began to connect him to the murders in Washington, Oregon, and Utah. Bundy's confidence remained unshaken. He still believed he could talk his way out. During his trial, Bundy represented himself, using his knowledge of the law to try and manipulate the court. His behavior was erratic, sometimes calm and collected, other times hostile. But despite his efforts, Bundy was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 15 years in prison. However, this wouldn't be the end of his story. In June 1977, while preparing for another trial in Colorado, Bundy made his first escape. He was allowed to visit the law library, where he leapt from a second-story window and fled on foot. He managed to evade capture for 6 days before being caught, but Bundy wasn't finished. In December 1977, just months after his first escape, Bundy broke out of jail again. This time, he crawled through a hole in the ceiling of his cell. He disappeared into the night, leaving authorities scrambling to find him. Bundy headed to Florida, where his final and most violent spree would take place. It was here that his killing reached a terrifying peak. On January 15, 1978, Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. It was just past 2 a.m. when Bundy entered the house and began a brutal attack. He bludgeoned and strangled 4 women in their sleep, killing 2, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, and seriously injuring 2 others. The scene inside the house was horrific. The surviving women were left with broken jaws, skull fractures, and deep trauma. The murders shocked the nation. Just a week after Kimberly Leach's abduction, Bundy was arrested again. A routine traffic stop led to his capture when police noticed the stolen plates on his car. This time, Bundy couldn't escape. By this point, Ted Bundy had become one of the FBI's most wanted men. His arrest marked the end of a multi-state manhunt. Now, all eyes turned to Bundy's upcoming trials, which would be some of the most publicized in history. The trials were a media sensation. Bundy, ever the manipulator, used the courtroom as a stage. He acted as his own attorney, cross-examined witnesses, and even proposed to his girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, in the middle of the trial, something that only added to the circus-like atmosphere. He married Boone right there in the courtroom. Despite Bundy's attempts to charm the jury and the public, the evidence against him was overwhelming. The forensic evidence, including bite marks left on Lisa Levy's body, directly linked him to the murders at the Chi Omega house. Bundy's days of freedom were over. On July 24, 1979, Ted Bundy was sentenced to death for the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy. Later, he would also be convicted of Kimberly Leach's murder and sentenced to death for that crime as well. Throughout it all, Bundy remained defiant, alternating between proclaiming his innocence and admitting to his crimes.
A judge in Miami today followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Theodore Bundy to die in the electric chair for the murder of 2 co-eds. Bundy is the 136th person under death sentence in Florida. Ed Rabel reports.
Before pronouncing the sentence, Judge Edward Cowart let Bundy make a statement.
I'm not asking for mercy, for I find it somewhat absurd to ask for mercy for something I did not do. So I will be tortured for and will suffer for and receive the pain for that act. But I will not share the burden for the guilt.
In imposing sentence, Judge Cowart cited the savagery of the crimes and what he called the indifference of the defendant.
This court, independent of, but in agreement with, the advisory sentence rendered by the jury, does hereby impose the death penalty upon the defendant Theodore Robert Bundy.
Then, in an unexpected move, perhaps an afterthought, Cowart stunned the courtroom with some parting words for Bundy.
Take care of yourself, young man.
Thank you.
I say that to you sincerely. Take care of yourself. It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer. I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner.
Bundy says he'll appeal. Meanwhile, he has been ordered to the state prison to await setting of the date of his execution in the electric chair. Ed Brable, CBS News, Miami.
As Bundy's execution date drew closer, people across the country debated the nature of evil. How could someone who appeared so normal, so likable, commit such monstrous acts? For many, Bundy was proof that evil could be hidden behind a mask of charm and intelligence. In the days leading up to his execution, Bundy finally began to confess. He admitted to killing at least 30 women, though many believed the actual number was much higher. For each confession, Bundy seemed to offer it as a trade, hoping to delay his execution by offering information on where the bodies were buried. It didn't work. On January 24th, 1989, at 7:16 a.m., Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Outside the prison, crowds gathered, cheering and celebrating the death of one of America's most notorious serial killers. Some held signs reading, "Burn, Bundy, burn." Bundy's execution marked the end of a terrifying chapter in American history, but the questions he left behind still haunt many. How could a man who seemed so normal on the outside be capable of such horrific violence? And how many more women might he have killed if he hadn't been caught? More than 30 women, daughters, sisters, friends, lost their lives because of Ted Bundy. Many of their names and stories remain unknown. The women who did survive his attacks, like Carol Duranch, are forever changed, haunted by the horror of their near escape from death. Duranch, who escaped from Bundy's clutches in Utah, was one of the few women who lived to tell her story. Her testimony helped convict Bundy and ensured he could never hurt another person again. But for Duranch and others, the trauma of their encounter with Bundy will last a lifetime. Today, Ted Bundy is remembered not only for his crimes, but for how he changed the way the world viewed serial killers. Before Bundy, most people believed that serial killers were loners, outsiders, easily identifiable by their strange or suspicious behavior. Bundy shattered that illusion. He was the perfect wolf in sheep's clothing. Bundy showed the world that evil can be hidden in plain sight, and that the most dangerous predators often look the least threatening. His case also led to advances in forensic science, including the use of bite mark evidence and psychological profiling, which helped investigators better understand the minds of serial killers. But perhaps the most important legacy of Ted Bundy's crimes is the reminder to be vigilant. His victims were ordinary young women, living ordinary lives, when they crossed paths with a killer they never could have predicted. Today, we honor their memory and hope that their stories will help prevent future tragedies.
Ted, it is about 2:30 in the afternoon. You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock if you don't receive another stay. What is going through your mind? What thoughts have you had in these last few days?
Well, I won't kid you to say that it's something that I feel that I am in control of, or something that I've come to terms with, because I haven't. It's a moment-by-moment thing. Sometimes I feel very tranquil, and other times I don't feel tranquil at all. What's going through my mind right now is to use the minutes and hours that I have left as fruitfully as possible and see what happens. It helps to live in the moment, in the essence that we use it productively. So right now I'm feeling calm, and in large part because I'm here with you.
For the record, you are guilty of killing many women and girls. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Ted, how did it happen? Take me back. What are the antecedents of the behavior that we've seen? So much grief, so much sorrow, so much pain for so many people. Where did it start? How did this moment come about?
That's the question of the hour, and one that not only people much more intelligent than I have been working on for for years, but one that I've been working on for years and trying to understand. Is there enough time to explain it all? I don't know. I think I understand it, though. Understand what happened to me, to the extent that I can see how certain feelings and ideas developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them. Certain very violent and very destructive feelings.
Let's go back then to those roots. First of all, you, as I understand it, were raised in what you consider to have been a healthy home.
Absolutely.
You were not physically abused. You were not sexually abused. You were not emotionally abused.
No way. And that's part of the tragedy of this whole situation, is because I grew up in a wonderful home with two dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church, 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. I'm not saying this was Leave It to Beaver.
It wasn't a perfect home.
Well, no, I don't know that such a home exists, but it was a fine, solid Christian home, and nobody, I hope no one will try to take the easy way out and to try to blame or otherwise accuse my family of contributing to this, because I know, and I'm trying to tell you as honestly as I know what happened, and I think this is a message I want to get across. But as a young boy, and I mean the boy of 12 or 13, certainly, that I encountered outside the home again, in the local grocery store, the local drugstore, the softcore pornography, what people call softcore. But as I think I explained to you last night, Dr. Dobson, in an anecdote, as young boys do, we explored the back roads and sideways and byways of our neighborhood, and oftentimes people would dump the garbage and whatever they were cleaning out of their house, and from time to time we'd come across pornographic books of a harder nature than more graphic, you might say, more explicit nature than we would encounter, let's say, in your local grocery store. And this also included such things as, let's say, detective magazines and more hardcore.
Those that involve violence. Then.
Yes, and and this is something I think I want to emphasize, is the most damaging kinds of pornography. And again, I'm talking from personal experience. Hard, real personal experience. The most damaging kinds of pornography are those that involve violence and sexual violence, because the wedding of those two forces, as I know only too well, brings about behavior that is just too terrible to describe.
Now walk me through that. What was going on in your mind at that time?
Okay, before we go any further, I think it's important to me, and that people believe what I'm saying, to tell you that I'm not blaming pornography and not saying that it caused me to go out and do certain things. And I take full responsibility for whatever I've done and all the things that I've done. That's not the question here. The question and the issue is how this kind of literature contributed and helped mold and shape the kinds of violent behavior.
It fueled your fantasies, didn't it?
Well, in the beginning, it fuels this kind of thought process. Then, at a certain time, it's instrumental in what I would say crystallizing it, making into something which is almost like a separate entity inside. And at that point, you're at the verge, or I was at the verge of acting out on these kinds of thoughts.
Now, I really want to understand that. You had gone about as far as you could go in your own fantasy life with printed material, and you made or printed and video or film
magazines, what have you. Yeah.
And then there was the urge to take that little step or big step over to a physical event.
And it happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. My experience with, I'd say, pornography generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with sexuality, is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.